One would think it's really hard to give bad positive feedback. In fact, I think that's one of the reasons why it's so prevalent that people give feedback that, although it seems positive, is destructive instead of constructive. In order to give good positive feedback, here are 7 things that you can consider about feedback you're giving. Number 1, try not to be misleading with positive feedback, or really become aware that positive feedback can be misleading. For example, if somebody bakes a pie and they'd like your feedback about what that pie tastes like, so they give you some of it, you try it, and in the process of trying that pie, you realize that the apples are hard. They don't taste very good. Now, in the process, you also know you don't want to hurt this person's feelings, so if you say to them, the pie is really good, even though you didn't like the apples inside, that's misleading. The next time they go to make a pie, they might make it exactly the same way and serve up pie that yet again has hard apples inside. So try not to be misleading with positive feedback, or recognize that you can say things like, wow, this is a really good pie, and at the same time mislead somebody into thinking everything about that pie was great. Number 2, try to reinforce certain behaviors or things that you found desirable about a situation. So in trying that pie, perhaps the apples were hard, but you might have noticed that you really liked the crust. So although you're going to tell them the apples were somewhat hard and could be a little softer, you should go about telling them that you really enjoyed the crust. So that's reinforcing something. So the next time they might make the crust the same way and try preparing the apples a different way. Number 3, be specific with your positive feedback. It's easy when we make generalizations about what it is we like and dislike that we can accidentally say things that aren't true. For example, we might just generally say we like the pie, even though in reality the apples were somewhat hard. And even though we like the crust, if we really want to help that person recreate another good crust, we should go further and tell them what about the crust we liked. For example, maybe it was really flaky and we really like flaky crusts. So we could say, the reason I like this crust is it's so flaky. I haven't had a pie with flaky crust like this anytime that I can remember. So be specific. It helps them understand what exactly satisfies you, what exactly you appreciated that you think they should do again in the future. And then when they make a pie in the future, if they want to see if the crust is just as good, they could go about tasting it and seeing if they think it's flaky themselves. Number 4, your positive feedback should be significant. A lot of times what happens is we all feel obligated to give some level of positive feedback. That's why it's easy when we find something we don't like, for example, hard apples, we still might not say that and just say, the pie was pretty good. We want to say positive things because we want to encourage people, but at the same time, we don't want to be misleading. And one of the best ways to not be misleading is to make sure that the feedback you're giving is significant. Don't feel obligated to ever give positive feedback. That's the source, perhaps, of the most trivial feedback you can give. For example, if you can't find anything about the pie that you really like, not even the crust, but you do like the pan for whatever reason, you don't need to start and lead with, the pan is really great, but the pie is horrible. Just leave that out. And the reason you want to leave that out is if you're giving trivial feedback about the pan, unless a person is designing pie pans, it's not helpful feedback. And a lot of times what happens then, and this feeds into number 5, is that if we give feedback about trivial things, that feedback will seem contrived, as if we were searching just to find anything positive we could say about the situation. So number 5 is don't give contrived feedback to people. Only give legitimate feedback. Another example of contrived feedback is just saying it's good, right? It's saying it's good as you're chewing through hard apples and you have this bitter look on your face or this distasteful look on your face. It'll be obvious that you're not being honest, and it'll cast a shadow of doubt about all the other feedback that you're giving to this person. So while you might have had something nice to say about the crust, they might dismiss it because you had said something contrived about the pie being good overall when you didn't like the apples being hard. Number 6, differentiate between situations where somebody is asking for you to merely observe and tell them what you observe. So the apples being hard and the crust being flaky, those are observations, or they're subjective observations, but they're observations nonetheless. But on the other hand, if something's wrong, for example, you think that the apples are hard, you might go a step further and make some suggestions, but separate out observation from suggestion. Suggestion is somewhat the next step in coaching the person to change something. You may or may not have suggestions to make. For example, I'm not a pie chef, so I really can't tell you what would make apples soft versus hard. I can only imagine that hard apples are probably not good in a pie. I could be wrong. But if you have an idea for how you can make soft apples because perhaps you have some expertise, then you could go a step further and say, you know what, the next time you could use this type of apple instead, so a different type of apple. Or perhaps you could use this preparation style instead, and your pie might come out with softer apples inside. But number 6 is overall separate out observation from the next step, which is suggestion, because you might not have suggestion to give, or you might have it to give. And then number 7, sometimes people just want validation, that they've done something nice for other people. They want to be recognized for what they've done. Now, a lot of times they won't ask you for this type of feedback outright. You'll know when somebody wants this type of feedback. Sometimes you just offer it up automatically. Recognize there are situations where somebody just wants to know that you're thankful that they made a pie. Maybe you didn't like the pie 100%, but you're thankful that they made a pie, so in that case you might say thank you to them for making the pie, and that might be what they're seeking. And this again is separate from the type of feedback where someone is specifically asked for observations and perhaps suggestions. So sometimes just look for the opportunity to validate that someone's made a nice contribution to everybody else. If you think through these 7 things, or even a few of them when you're giving positive feedback, you're sure to give feedback that helps build people up and doesn't inadvertently tear them down.